T-minus 20 seconds and counting. We are go. Guidance internal.
Roll program confirmed.
10, 9, 8, 7. Ignition sequence start. 4, 3, 2, 1. All engines running.
The most important period in automobile history was from the beginning of the Ford Motor Company in 1893 through the end of the Paquette era. Hi, I'm Dave Dunlavy. I'm glad you could join me in looking at the early years of the Ford Motor Company. We're going to hear what Henry Ford wrote in his book, My Life and Work. We'll get a different perspective from Bruce McCauley, one of the founders of the Model T Ford Club of America. He contributed to our video by providing pictures and information. We will start with what Henry Ford said.
The biggest event of those early years was the meeting with the road engine one day when we were driving to town. I was 12 years old. In 1879, I managed to get a chance to run one, and when my apprenticeship was over, I worked with a local representative of the Westinghouse Company in Schenectady as the expert in setting up and repair of their road engines. Even before that time, I had the idea of making some kind of a light steam car that would take the place of horses. It occurred to me that precisely the same idea might be applied to a carriage or a wagon on the road. In 1885, I repaired an Otto engine at the Eagle Iron Works in Detroit. In 1887, I built one of those Otto 4-cycle engines just to see if I understood the principles. The little model worked well enough. It had a 1-inch bore and a 3-inch stroke, operated with gasoline, and while it did not develop much power, it was slightly lighter in proportion than the engines offered commercially. This was the beginning of the work with the internal combustion engine. It was in 1890 that I began on a double-cylinder engine. I was offered a job in the Detroit Electric Company as an engineer and machinist at $45 a month. We rented a house on Bagley Avenue in Detroit. In 1892, I completed my first motor car, but it was not until the spring of the following year that it ran to my satisfaction. The first car had something of the appearance of a buggy. There were 2 cylinders with 2.5-inch bore and a 6-inch stroke set side by side over the rear axle. I made them out of an exhaust pipe from a steam engine that I had bought. They developed about 4 horsepower. The power was transmitted from the motor to the countershaft by a belt, and from the countershaft to the rear wheel by a chain. The car would hold 2 people, the seat being suspended on posts and the body on elliptical springs. In the spring of 1893, the machine was running to my partial satisfaction and giving an opportunity to further test out the design and the material on the road. My gasoline buggy was the first and for a long time the only automobile in Detroit. It was considered to be something of a nuisance, for it made a racket and scared horses. I ran that machine about 1,000 miles through 1895 and 1896, and then sold it to Charles Ainsley of Detroit for $200. I started a second car in 1896. It was much like the first, but a little lighter. It also had a belt drive, which I did not give up on until some time later. The belts were all right, except in hot weather. That is why I later adopted gears. I learned a great deal from that car. I built 3 cars in all in my home shop, and all of them ran for years in Detroit. During all this time, I kept my position with the electric company and gradually advanced to chief engineer. The Edison Company offered me the general superintendency of the company, but only on the condition that I would give up on my gas engine. I quit my job on August 15, 1899, and went into the automobile business. A group of men organized as soon as I left the electric company, the Detroit Automobile Company, to exploit my car. I was the chief engineer and held a small amount of the stock. I found the new company was not a vehicle for realizing my ideas. Until the formation of my present company, I built about 25 cars, of which 19 or 20 were built by the Detroit Automobile Company. In March 1902, I resigned, determined never again to put myself under orders. During this period, Henry Ford met C.H. Wills. He was Ford's right arm through the early years and was as responsible for the Ford automobiles as Ford himself. Rather than purchasing stock in the company, Wills had an agreement that he, Wills, would share in whatever profit Ford made. Neither had any idea of Ford's future income, but it appears that Wills may have received as much as 10%. As time passed, Ford had misgivings about the deal, and in 1919 took action and finally caused Wills to resign. It was reported that Ford got out of the deal by mutual agreement and gave Wills a settlement check for $1 million. Wills went on to form his own company and produced the Wills St. Clair automobile during the 1920s. Ford had become convinced that the builder of a winning race car would have little trouble finding backers in future automobile manufacturing efforts. The Racer was built. It had 2 cylinders, horizontally opposed, of 7 inches bore and stroke. This racer entered in a race at Grosse Pointe, Michigan, against Alexander Winton on October 10, 1901. Ford won the race. This racing success encouraged Ford's backers to establish Henry Ford Company, filing papers on November 30, 1901. There were 6 people involved in this company. Henry Ford was one of the 6, but contributed no money. The other 5 invested $30,500, all of which had been involved with the Detroit Automobile Company. The stockholders began to look for another man to get the company into production. The man they found was Henry Leland. After 4 months, Ford resigned and left the firm. He took his rights to his name and his tools on March 10, 1902. The 5 investors reorganized the operation, and the company became known as the Cadillac Automobile Company. Work resumed on the 999 and the Arrow racers. Ford, Wills, Ed Spider Huff, and Oliver Barthel worked on the projects. Neither Henry Ford nor any of the others had any money, but they found a source of funds in a race driver named Tom Cooper. Cooper put up the cash and would be the owner of one of the cars when they completed. They did run them in demonstrations against the clock, but it was not until Cooper brought in Barney Oldfield that a real race was tried. The race was 5 miles on a 1/3 mile track in October 15, 1902. Oldfield won by over a lap, setting a new American record, just under 60 miles an hour average. Oldfield and Ford became famous. It was about that time that Ford and Alexander Malcolmson joined forces. Ford had purchased coal from Malcolmson while working for Edison Company. The success of the 999 added fire to Malcolmson's enthusiasm. The two formed a partnership. Malcolmson agreed to invest $3,000, which grew to $7,000 during the next 6 months. The business was set up with a capital stock of $150,000 at $100 per share. The partners took 6,900 shares for their efforts to date and agreed to invest another $3,500. The plan was to sell the remaining shares to outsiders. While Ford was busy working on the new car, Malcolmson began trying to sell stock. He met Albert Strello, a relatively large building contractor in Detroit. Strello owned a cabinet shop next to a railroad on Mack Avenue and agreed to rent it for $75 a month. They moved into the new plant on April 1, 1903. During this period, the new company approached the Dodge brothers. They were quite successful machinists and were producing engines and parts for Oldsmobile. The Dodges were impressed with the Ford design of the 2-cylinder horizontally opposed engine. Oldsmobile and others used 1-cylinder engines. The Dodges agreed to supply 650 complete chassis, less bodies, tires, and wheels, at $250 each. On June 13, 1903, 10 new stockholders met with Ford and Malcolmson and agreed to form the Ford Motor Company. $28,000 cash was paid in initially. Now we continue reading from Ford's book, My Life and Work. I owned 25.5% of the company. I very shortly found out I had to have control, and in 1906, with funds I earned in the company, I bought enough stock to bring my holdings up to 58.5%. In our first year, we built Model A, selling the runabout for $850 and the tonneau for $100 more. This model had a two-cylinder opposed motor developing 8 horsepower. It had a chain drive, a 72-inch wheelbase, which was quite long at the time, and a fuel capacity of 5 gallons. We made and sold 1,708 cars the first year. That is how well the public responded. In our second year, we scattered our energies among 3 models. We made a 4-cylinder touring car, Model B, which sold for $2,000. Model C, which was a slightly improved Model A, and sold for $50 more than the former price. And a Model F, a touring car, which sold for $1,000. We scattered our energies and increased our prices and sold fewer cars than in the first year. The sales were 1,695 cars. The Model B, the first 4-cylinder car for general road use, had to be advertised. I fixed up the aero, and a week before the New York Automobile Show, I drove it myself over a surveyed mile straight away on the ice. I shall never forget that race. The ice seemed smooth enough, but instead of being smooth, that ice was seamed with fissures, which I knew were going to mean trouble the moment I got up to speed. Somehow I stayed topside up and on course, making a record that went all over the world. That put the Model B on the map, but not enough to overcome the price advances. The moral is coming. Our little wooden shop had become totally inadequate, and in 1906 we took out of our working capital sufficient funds to build a 3-story plant at the corner of Paquette and Beaubien streets. In 1905 and 6 we made only 2 models, one the 4-cylinder at $2,000 and another touring car at $1,000, and our sales dropped to 1,599 cars. I changed the policy in the next year, having first acquired stock control. For 1906, 1907, we entirely left off making touring cars and made 3 models of runabouts and roadsters. The big thing was the cheapest car sold for $600 and the most expensive for only $750. And right there came the complete demonstration of what price meant. We sold 8,423 cars, nearly 5 times as many as our biggest previous year. In the next year, we departed from the program that had been so successful, and I designed a big car, 50 horsepower, 6-cylinder, that would burn up the roads. We continued making our small cars, but the 1907 panic and the diversion to the more expensive model cut down the sales to 6,398 cars. We had been through an experimenting period of 5 years. The business, as an automobile business, was considered extraordinarily prosperous. Since the first year, we have practically always had plenty of money. We sold for cash, we did not borrow money, and we sold directly to the purchaser. We had no bad debts, and we kept within ourselves on every move. We were harried by a big suit brought against the company to try to force us into line with an association of automobile manufacturers who were operating under the false principle that there was only a limited market for automobiles. This was the famous Selden patent suit. By 1908, in spite of the suit, we had come to the point where it was possible to announce and put into fabrication the kind of a car that I wanted to build. In 1905, I was at a motor race in Palm Beach. There was a big smash-up and a French car was wrecked. After the wreck, I picked up a little valve strip stem. It was very light and very strong. I asked what it was made of. Nobody knew. I gave the stem to my assistant. "Find out all about this," I told him. "That is the kind of material we ought to have in all our cars." He found eventually that it was a French steel and there was vanadium in them. I found a small steel company in Canton, Ohio. With the vanadium, the strength went up from 60 to 70,000 pounds to 170,000 pounds. Having vanadium in hand, I pulled apart all our models and tested in detail to determine what kind of steel was best for every part. We, for the first time, I think, in the history of any large construction, determined scientifically the exact quality of steel. The vanadium steel disposed of much of the weight. The other requisites of a universal car I had already worked out, and many of them were in practice. All my efforts were then in production of one car, one model. The design which I settled upon was called the Model T. The important feature of the new model was its simplicity. It is not necessary to go into the technical details of the construction, but perhaps this is as good a place as any to review the various models. I designed 8 models in all before the Model T. They were the Model A, Model B, Model C, Model F, Model N, Model R, Model S, and Model K. Of these, Model A, C, and F had 2-cylinder opposed horizontal motors. In Model A, the motor was in the rear of the driver's seat. In all other models, it was in the hood in the front. Model B, N, R, and S had motors of 4-cylinder vertical type. Model K had 6 cylinders. Model A developed 8 horsepower. Model B developed 24 horsepower with a 4.5-inch cylinder and a 5-inch stroke. The highest horsepower was in the Model K, the 6-cylinder car, which developed 45 horsepower. Model A had a 72-inch wheelbase. Model B, which was an extremely good car, had 92 inches. Model K had 120 inches. Model C had 78 inches. The others were 84 inches, and the present car has 100 inches. The Model T had practically no features which were not contained in some way or another of other models. We put out Model T for the season 1908-1909. The company was then 5 years old. The original factory space had been 0.28 acres. We had employed an average of 311 people the first year, built 1,708 cars, and had 1 branch house. In 1908, the factory space had increased to 2.65 acres, and we owned the building. The average number of employees had increased to 1,908. We built 6,181 cars and had 14 branch houses. It was a profitable business. Ford was one of 15 Michigan companies and one of 88 firms in America introducing automobiles in 1903. Neither the amount of its capitalization nor its prospects for success were out of the ordinary. From the outset, it could be distinguished from most of the rest because it made money. A total of $36,957 was netted within 3.5 months. A 10% dividend was paid on November 21st. The flow of dividends would continue for 23 years. We've covered a lot of information in a short time. The final chapter of the early years occurred in 1911 when the Paquette plant was sold to Studebaker. Thanks for joining me in this interesting journey. Keep 'em on the road.